To take control of my $25 million estate, my daughter shoved me onto the cold kitchen floor and sneered, "You're useless now." She thought she had it all, but she didn't know my late husband's will had a secret clause, and this bruise was the evidence I needed to activate it. Have you ever looked at someone you love more than life itself and wondered how their heart could become such a foreign country? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? To realize the person you raised, the one whose every feature you know by heart, has a landscape inside them you no longer recognize, a place where the love you planted no longer grows. You look into their eyes and see a stranger looking back, a stranger who happens to have your smile, your way of tilting your head. That's the question I asked myself on the day the soul of my house died. But first, wherever you're listening, in your kitchen, in your car, on a quiet walk, do an old woman a favor. Hit that like button or leave me a little comment below, just so I know I'm not just talking to myself. That little bit of support means the world. It had been a week since we buried Robert. A week of waking up to the wrong side of the bed being empty, the indentation from his head on the pillow next to mine having finally faded, leaving a smooth, undisturbed surface that felt like a betrayal. The house, our house of 40 years, had fallen into a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. It absorbed sound. My own footsteps on the oak floors seemed muffled, swallowed by the vast, echoing quiet that had taken up residence in every room. I missed the little noises that had been the soundtrack of my life for as long as I could remember. The solid, reassuring thud of his size 11 shoes coming down the stairs in the morning, the soft, almost imperceptible cough he'd give from his study when he was deep in thought over the newspaper, the way he'd call my name on see Maggie from the garden, a sound that always made me feel found, even when I didn't know I was lost. Now the only sound was the steady metronomic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound I'd barely noticed when his presence filled the space around it. Now it was a torment, each tick a measurement of the time he was gone, each tock a reminder of the time I had left to spend alone. That clock, a wedding gift from his parents, had measured out the rhythms of our life together. The birth of our daughter, anniversaries, Christmases, the quiet Tuesdays. Now, it was just measuring out the emptiness. The silence was a physical thing, a weight in the air that made it hard to breathe, a fine dust of sorrow settling on every surface no matter how often I cleaned. I spent my days in a flurry of aimless activity, a desperate attempt to outrun the grief that was always at my heels. I'd rearrange the books on his shelves, his beloved histories and biographies, tracing the worn leather spines with my fingertips, half expecting to feel the warmth of his hand still on them. I would open one, and the scent of old paper and Robert's pipe tobacco would rise up, a ghost of a scent that was more painful than if it had disappeared entirely. I'd run a dustcloth over the silver frame of our wedding photograph, the one from 50 years ago that sat on the mantelpiece. Two young people squinting in the bright California sun, so full of dreams, blissfully unaware of the long, beautiful, complicated road ahead. Polishing that frame was a mindless act, a way to keep my hands busy when my heart didn't know what else to do. My hands knew the motions of care, of tending, of polishing away the tarnish of time. My heart, however, was utterly and completely lost. Victoria arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the way a storm front moves in, unannounced and changing the pressure in the air. I saw her sleek silver Mercedes pull into the driveway, a car that cost more than the first house Robert and I had owned. She wore an expensive-looking cream-colored pantsuit, an outfit so crisp and sterile it seemed to wage war with the warm, lived-in clutter of my kitchen. It was armor, I realized later, a uniform for the battle she had come to wage. She didn't sit down, didn't accept the offer of tea I made out of habit. She paced, her sharp stiletto heels clicking a nervous, impatient rhythm on the terracotta tiles. It was a sound of intrusion, of a world of boardrooms and deadlines invading the sanctuary of my home. She ran a manicured finger over the granite countertop Robert had insisted on installing for my 65th birthday. Only the best for my Maggie, Bam, he'd said, checking for dust where there was none. Mom, I'm worried about you, she said, her voice as flat and smooth as the granite she was touching. It was her professional voice, the one she used to close deals, devoid of any real warmth or inflection. Her eyes, the same blue eyes I looked into a million times, were busy. They weren't looking at me, not really. They were cataloging, assessing, taking inventory. This house is just too much for you to handle alone. The upkeep, the property taxes, the gardening. You can't manage it all. I said nothing. I stood by the sink, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water that was suddenly growing cold. My knuckles were white as I gripped a coffee mug, scrubbing at a stain that wasn't there. I felt a cold, smooth falseness in her words, a rehearsed concern that didn't reach her eyes. The love of a mother is a stubborn, foolish thing. It's a congenital condition of the heart, I think. It pushes away doubt, patches over the cracks in the foundation of a relationship, and insists on believing the best, even when a cold dread is coiling in your stomach. So I stood there, silent, drying my hands on my apron, and I let myself pretend she was here because she cared, not because she was surveying her inheritance. She placed a thick sheaf of papers on the kitchen table with a soft, authoritative thud. The sound was obscene in the quiet room. It landed right on the spot where she'd done her homework as a little girl, where we'd carved pumpkins and frosted Christmas cookies. The old pine wood still bearing a faint scar from a childhood craft project gone wrong. These are just some legal forms, she explained, her words quick and clipped, designed to skim over importance. Just to give me power of attorney, so I can help you manage your finances, pay the bills. It's just temporary, Mom, to give you time to grieve properly without all this stress. I stared at the dense blocks of text, a foreign language of clauses and subclauses, of heretofores and whereases that made my head spin. I was 67 years old. My husband had handled all of this. For my entire adult life, I had placed my complete and unwavering trust in two people, my husband and my daughter. My husband was gone. A part of me, the logical, cautious part, a part that had learned from Robert's careful ways, screamed that this was wrong. Robert would have read every single word. He would have taken it to his lawyer. He would have sat me down and explained it line by line. But another, much older part of me, the mother part, the part that still saw the little girl with scraped knees and pigtails, just looked at her daughter's face. You just need to sign here, she said, pointing a perfectly manicured nail, the polish the color of dried blood, to a blank line at the bottom of the last page. For a single, fleeting second that stretched into an eternity, I hesitated. The pen felt heavy and cold in my hand. A small voice in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded a lot like Robert's, whispered, "Wait, Maggie. Read it." But then I looked up at Victoria's face. I saw the impatience in the slight tightening of her lips, the hard glint in her eyes, and I told myself it was just stress. that she was grieving too, in her own way. I told myself I was being a silly, suspicious old woman, and I didn't want my daughter to think I didn't trust her. The thought was unbearable, so I pushed the warning voice down. I took a breath, and I signed. With a few shaky strokes of a pen, I signed away my home, my savings, my security, my entire life. The moving truck arrived 2 days later. I heard it before I saw it, the deep rumble and the pneumatic hiss of its air brakes that sounded like a final, weary sigh from the world itself. I went to the window, my heart suddenly holed hard knot in my chest. Two large men in dusty overalls were walking up my driveway as if they owned it, followed by Victoria and her husband, Kevin, who had the smug look of a hyena that had just found a fresh kill. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice a thin, trembling thing in the suddenly crowded hallway. I stood there in my housecoat, a relic from a life that was, in that moment, ending. Victoria wouldn't look at me. She was busy directing one of the men toward the living room. "We're just going to do a little decluttering, Mom. Reorganize things to make them more manageable. You know you've been letting things pile up." But they didn't reorganize. They started packing. My collection of porcelain birds that I'd gathered from antique shops over the years. The antique tea set my grandmother had brought over from Ireland, and Robert's favorite worn leather armchair, the one that still held the faint shape of his body. They worked with a cold, brutal efficiency, moving through the rooms of my life as if I were a ghost, a shadow in my own home. My voice, my protests, my pleas were nothing but air to them. The feeling of being invisible is a unique kind of pain. It's not a sharp wound. It's an erasure. It's the realization that your presence has ceased to matter. "Stop!" I finally screamed, my voice raw and torn from my throat as they tried to lift Robert's portrait from the living room wall. It was a painting I'd commissioned for his 60th birthday. It had captured the twinkle in his eye perfectly. It was the last line, my breaking point. Victoria marched toward me, her face a mask of fury I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "You've made enough of a scene. This house is mine now. You signed the papers." When I tried to block her path, to shield my husband's memory with my own body, the unthinkable happened. It was a moment that plays in my mind in slow motion. Her hands coming toward me, the look of pure contempt on her face. She put her hands on my shoulders and shoved hard. My world tilted. I lost my balance, stumbling backward, my arm slamming against the sharp, unforgiving edge of the oak door frame. A bolt of searing, white-hot pain shot from my shoulder to my fingertips. My head hit the floor with a sickening thud. But the physical pain, as sharp as it was nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the shock that shattered my heart into a million pieces. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had just laid hands on me. Kevin, who had been watching silently from the doorway, walked over and tossed a small wallet at my feet. It landed on the floor beside me with a soft, insulting thud. "There's $100 in there, enough for a bus ticket." Victoria stood over me, looking down at me as I lay crumpled on the floor of the home I had built, with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Find somewhere else to die," she said, her voice as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "You're useless now." The front door slammed shut. The sound echoed the final closing of a chapter, the end of a life. The heavy oak door, which had welcomed home a baby from the hospital, which had been decorated with wreaths at Christmas and black bunting for a funeral, was now a barrier. I was left alone on the cold stone porch with $100, a blossoming bruise on my arm, and a cruel sentence that would be forever burned into my soul. The life I had known was over. The motel I found was on the frayed edge of town, where the neon signs for bail bonds and cheap liquor flickered with a tired, desperate buzz. The sign for the Starlight Motel had a sputtering S, so it just read Tarlight, which felt appropriate. The stars in my life had certainly gone out. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke, cheap disinfectant, and a deep, abiding sadness that seemed to have soaked into the thin, stained carpet. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern, and it felt thin and cold beneath my fingers. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my back ramrod straight, afraid to lean back against the greasy headboard, as if the despair of all the strangers who had stayed here before me might seep into my skin. I stared at the stained carpet, tracing the faded patterns with my eyes, forcing myself not to think of my warm, clean bed at home, of the familiar scent of lavender and cedar in the bedroom I had shared with Robert for 40 years. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was my new reality. In the space of an afternoon, I had become one of the invisible people, a woman erased from her own life. My arm throbbed with a deep, persistent ache. Under the sallow yellow light of the bedside lamp, the bruise was a ghastly, darkening purple, an ugly flower blooming on my skin. It was a physical tattoo of betrayal. I went into the tiny, mold-speckled bathroom and ran cold water over it from the squealing faucet, trying to soothe the burning sting. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her hair a tangled mess, and her face was etched with a raw fear I had never seen on myself before. It was the face of a victim. My first instinct was shame, a hot, suffocating wave of it that made my cheeks burn. I pulled the sleeve of my blouse down, covering the mark. It was an instinct passed down through generations of women who were taught to endure, to hide their pain, to keep the family's secrets. Being hurt is one thing. Being hurt by your own child is a humiliation too profound to easily confront. It felt like a personal failure, a testament to some inadequacy in my own mothering that had allowed such a monster to grow. The sound of rain began to drum against the window pane, a sad, lonely rhythm. It pulled me back to the night Hurricane Sandy hit in 2012. The power had gone out, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf against the windows. I'd been terrified, but Robert had held my hand in the dark, his grip firm and steady. "We'll be all right, Maggie," he'd said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "As long as we have each other." We had weathered so many storms together, he and I. We'd survived the 2008 financial crisis when our savings were nearly wiped out. We'd rebuilt. I remembered the nights of quiet panic, the mornings of forced optimism, but we had done it together. This storm, however, I had to face alone, and the architect of this destruction wasn't an act of God, it was my own daughter. I took out the small wallet Kevin had thrown at me. Inside were 5 crisp $20 bills. They felt dirty in my hands. I wondered how long Victoria had been planning this. Had she withdrawn the cash in advance, preparing the final insult for the moment she cast her own mother out? The thought hurt more than the bruise. It was a premeditated cruelty that was impossible to fathom. I remembered all the little allowances I had given her, the checks I'd written for her college tuition, the down payment Robert and I had given her for her first house, a gift that had stretched us thin but had brought us so much joy. We had given her everything we had, our love, our resources, our lives, and in return, I received $100 and an eviction. The indignity of that small sum of money felt heavier than all the gold in the world. In the crushing silence of the room, a memory surfaced from the depths of my mind from a book by Maya Angelou I had read in my book club long ago. I couldn't recall the exact words, but the sentiment echoed with the force of a revelation. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. For 40 years, I had been Robert's wife. For 35, I had been Victoria's mother. Those roles had defined me. But who was Margaret? Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten. I had become a collection of duties and relationships, my own self worn away to a smooth, accommodating shape. I looked at the bruise on my arm again, pulling up the sleeve to stare at it under the dim light. It wasn't just an injury anymore. It was a wake-up call. It was ugly, painful proof that I had allowed myself to be reduced. I could not die here, in this cheap, anonymous room, remembered only as a useless old woman. With an effort that felt monumental, I stood up, my joints aching in protest. I walked to the old, grimy rotary phone on the nightstand. I fumbled in my purse for the little leather-bound address book I always carried. My fingers, clumsy with shock and age, flipped through the pages. There was a name in it I hadn't had reason to call in years, not since Robert's passing. Harrison Fitzgerald. He wasn't just Robert's lawyer. He had been his friend since college. They had been best men at each other's weddings. My hand trembled as I dialed the number for his office, praying I would just get a machine. I had no idea what I would say. I had no idea if he would even believe me. But I knew one thing for certain. I would not be silent. I would not let my story end like this. This might be the longest night of my life, but I was damned if it would be the last. The next morning, I took the first bus downtown. The city was waking up, a symphony of traffic and hurried footsteps. I sat in the back, my collar pulled up, trying to make myself as small and invisible as I felt. Every jolt of the bus sent a dull, throbbing pain through my arm, a constant reminder of yesterday's horror. I watched the other passengers, people with places to go, with purpose in their steps. A young woman heading to her office, a construction worker with his lunch pail, students with backpacks. I was an outcast, a refugee from my own life, on my way to tell an unbelievable story, that my daughter had assaulted me and stolen my life. The slip of paper with Harrison Fitzgerald's address was crumpled and damp in my sweating palm. It wasn't just an address. It was my only hope. I felt a strange mix of terror and determination. I had survived the Great Recession with Robert. We had lost nearly everything, but had built it all back. I would not be broken by this. Mr. Fitzgerald's office was in an old, stately building downtown, the kind with a marble lobby and a quiet, efficient elevator that smelled of brass polish. The air inside his firm's reception area was of another world. It smelled of leather, aging paper, and quiet money. The young receptionist, a girl no older than Victoria had been in college, gave me a look of polite pity. I must have been a sorry sight in my wrinkled clothes and disheveled hair. I sat on a plush leather sofa in the waiting room, sinking into its depths, feeling utterly out of place, steeped in shame. On the polished mahogany coffee table lay magazines about finance and luxury cruises. My eyes landed on an advertisement for a trip to Alaska, a full-page spread of majestic glaciers and breaching wails. It was the trip Robert and I had always dreamed of taking for our 50th anniversary, but then he'd gotten sick. A single hot tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. I brushed it away angrily. I was not here to cry. I was here to fight. Harrison Fitzgerald looked older than when I last seen him at the funeral, offering a heartfelt but brief condolence. His hair was completely white, but his eyes, behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, were still sharp and kind. He came out to greet me himself, his professional smile faltering, then vanishing completely as he took in my appearance. "Margaret? Good Lord, what's happened?" he asked, his voice low and filled with genuine concern. He didn't wait for an answer in the public waiting room. He gently took my elbow and led me into his office, a sanctuary lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with formidable-looking legal volumes. It was Robert's dream of a room. He settled me into a soft leather chair opposite his large desk and poured me a cup of hot tea himself. The warmth of the porcelain mug seeped into my cold, trembling hands. For the first time in days, I felt seen as a human being, not an obstacle or a burden. But how could I begin? How could I voice such a monstrous, shameful truth? I started to speak, my voice shaky and broken, a thread of sound in the quiet, dignified room. I told him about the loneliness after Robert's death, a silence in the house so loud it was all I could hear. I told him about Victoria's visit, about the papers I had so blindly, so foolishly signed. I told him about the moving truck and the cold, efficient packing of my life into cardboard boxes. Each word was like a shard of glass in my throat. Harrison listened in complete silence, his hands clasped on his large desk, his expression growing more and more grave. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't show a flicker of disbelief. He just listened, his eyes never leaving mine. He gave me the space to empty all the pain and humiliation, and his quiet, patient attention was a gift. It gave me the courage to get to the end of the story. "And then she pushed me," I whispered, my voice finally failing me, breaking on the word. In an unconscious gesture of distress, I raised my hand to wipe my eyes, and the sleeve of my blouse, which I had so carefully kept pulled down, slid toward my elbow, revealing the full, horrific glory of the bruise on my arm. It was a sickening tapestry of purple, blue, and an angry mottled yellow. Harrison went still, his professional calm shattered. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, the kindness in them replaced by a hard, flinty anger. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and hard as granite, "did Victoria do this to you?" I could only nod, tears choking off my words. My silence was its own confession. Harrison's expression shifted from concern to a cold, controlled fury. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the city skyline for a long moment, his back to me. When he turned back, his face was set like stone. "This is no longer a dispute over property, Margaret," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "This is a criminal matter." He took out a small digital camera from his desk drawer and began photographing the bruise from every angle, his movements precise and methodical. Each click of the shutter felt like a small, sharp declaration of war. "Robert was my best friend," Harrison said, his jaw tight as he focused the lens. "We went through hell and back together. He would never forgive me if I let this happen to you. Margaret, I promise you, we are going to get everything back. Not just the money, not just the house. We are going to get you justice." and we are going to get you back your dignity." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime of darkness, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited within me. I was no longer alone. My fight now had an ally. "Robert was a meticulous man," Harrison said to me the next day. We were in his office again. He had arranged for me to stay in a small but clean corporate apartment, a safe haven where I could breathe. He always had a backup plan. In fact, he usually had a backup plan for his backup plan. He told me years ago, after Victoria's first divorce, that his final, true will wasn't kept at the house. He said it was in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. His words stunned me into silence. Robert had never mentioned this. He had always been private about financial matters, but this was a secret of a different magnitude. Harrison explained he'd need a court order to open the box, but with the evidence of the assault and the fraudulent transfer of property, he was confident he could get it expedited. While we waited, I settled into the anonymous quiet of the apartment. It had none of the warmth of my home, but it was safe. It was a place to breathe and begin to piece myself back together from the wreckage. A few days later, which felt like an eternity, Harrison and I walked into the hushed, cold vault of the bank. The air was still and chilled, the only sound the metallic click of locks and our own soft footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A serious-looking bank employee in a dark suit used two separate keys, one his and one that Harrison produced, to open box number 347. As he slid out the long metal container and placed it on a polished wooden table in a private viewing room, my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. This felt like a moment of communion with my dead husband, a final message he had left for me. Inside the cool, dark box were some old savings bonds we'd forgotten about, the deed to a small plot of land we'd bought in North Carolina ages ago as a foolish, romantic dream, and a large, yellowed vellum envelope. It was sealed with a thick dollop of red wax, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies. The seal bore the image of an oak tree, the Sullivan family crest. This was it. Back in the quiet sanctuary of his office, Harrison carefully slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. His hand was steady, but I could see the tension in the set of his jaw. He pulled out a thick, stapled document. The first page read in bold, authoritative letters, "The last will and testament of Robert Sullivan." Harrison began to scan the first few pages, his finger tracing the lines, murmuring about the familiar clauses regarding asset distribution and charitable donations. Then he stopped. He went completely still, his eyes fixed on a paragraph near the end. He read it once, then read it again, slowly, as if he couldn't believe the words. He looked up at me, his face a mask of utter, incredulous astonishment. "Robert, you old son of a gun," Harrison whispered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You magnificent man. Listen to this, Margaret," he said, his voice filled with a kind of triumphant reverence. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "To my daughter, Victoria Hayes, I bequeath the remaining half of my estate, estimated at a value of $10 million. This inheritance, however, is entirely conditional. It is contingent upon her demonstrating, to the satisfaction of my executor, that she has treated her mother, Margaret Sullivan, with the appropriate care, comfort, and respect following my passing. Any documented act of cruelty, neglect, or emotional or physical abuse shall immediately render this entire portion of the inheritance null and void. The final determination of this condition shall rest solely with the executor of my estate, Harrison Fitzgerald." I sat frozen in my chair, the teacup trembling in my hand. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry began to stream down my face. These were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude Robert had known. Somehow, in that deep, quiet, perceptive way of his, he had known the true nature of our daughter. He had seen the greed that coiled beneath her sweet words and dutiful actions. This will wasn't about money. It was the last shield he had left behind to protect me. It was his love, reaching out from beyond the grave to shelter me one last time. I could almost feel his presence in that room, as solid and warm as if he were sitting right beside me, one hand on my shoulder telling me, "I'm here, Maggie. I'll never leave you." His foresight was a final, tender act of love, a testament to a 40-year conversation that death itself could not end. Harrison laid the will down on the desk with a sense of finality, right next to the glossy, damning photographs of my bruised arm. "Margaret," he said, his voice like steel, "the day she pushed you, she lit a $10 million bonfire and danced around it." He picked up one of the photos. "And this," he said, tapping the ugly purple mark, "is her signature on the confession." The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been completely, seismically upended. We didn't just have a story anymore. We had a weapon, forged by a husband's love and an abuser's cruelty. Thinking about it now, it's funny what things we put our trust in. Have you ever bought a product, say a comfortable armchair from a brand like Lazy Boy, not just for the quality, but because you believe it will bring a sense of safety and peace into your home? It's more than just an object. It's a promise of comfort. Tell me about an object that brings you that kind of reassurance in the comments below. Harrison officially filed the lawsuit, a comprehensive legal assault that cited the fraudulent property transfer, the assault, and the powerful, undeniable conditions of Robert's true will. The summons was served to Victoria personally at the lavish mansion she now occupied. Imagine the scene, her surprise, the flash of disbelief, quickly morphing into anger and then contempt. In her mind, I was sure, I was just a senile old woman who could be easily intimidated into surrender. She had always seen my quiet nature as weakness, my kindness as a flaw to be exploited. She didn't understand that the fire she had started in me could no longer be extinguished. She had underestimated the strength of a mother with nothing left to lose. The war had officially begun, not with a bang, but with the cold, legal rustle of paper that spelled out her doom. They didn't take it lying down. Her response was swift and vicious. A few days later, Harrison received a letter from Victoria's high-priced attorney. It wasn't a settlement offer, it was a threat, a piece of calculated cruelty designed to break my spirit. It stated that if I did not immediately drop the lawsuit, they would go to the press with information regarding Robert's questionable business practices in his final years. They insinuated, with greasy veiled language, that the $25 million estate was not built on entirely clean foundations. That blow hurt more than the fall. The physical pain had been sharp and shocking, but this was a deeper, more insidious wound. They weren't just attacking me now. They were trying to desecrate the memory of the man I loved, a man of unimpeachable honor, a man who was no longer here to defend himself. They were trying to poison my past and destroy my future in one fell swoop. The threat planted a poisonous seed of doubt in my mind. Despite my faith in Robert, their words were insidious. I started replaying Robert's last few years in my mind, searching for clues, for cracks in the facade. He had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He often worked late into the night, shutting himself in his study. Sometimes I'd find him just sitting in the dark, staring out the window, a troubled, weary look on his face. When I'd ask what was wrong, he would just brush it off as the pressures of work, smiling a tired smile and telling me not to worry my pretty little head. I had believed him. I had respected his privacy, but now those memories returned with a sinister new meaning. Had he been hiding something from me? Was the love and respect I held for him, the very foundation of my life, built on a lie? The pain of his loss was now compounded by a terrible uncertainty about the man he truly was. My mind drifted back further to the 2008 financial crisis. I remembered the sheer terror of watching the news, of seeing our life savings, everything we had worked for, evaporate by almost half in a matter of weeks. Many of our friends lost everything, their homes, their businesses, their hope. But not Robert. He had worked day and night, a general commanding a losing army. He made bold, brilliant, sometimes terrifying decisions, and he had steered our ship through the hurricane, saving not only our family but the jobs of dozens of his employees. I remembered him coming home late one night, exhausted but resolute. He had taken my hands and said, "Maggie, integrity is the only thing we can't afford to lose. Money comes and goes. Honor is all we really have." Could a man like that, a man who lived by that code, do something illegal? The memory was an anchor, a solid point of truth in a swirling sea of doubt, keeping my faith from being completely swept away. I couldn't sleep that night. The quiet of the apartment felt accusatory. I reached for my old Bible, a gift from my mother on my wedding day, its pages soft and worn from years of use. I turned to the Psalms, the place I always found comfort. The familiar words were a balm to my troubled soul. "The Lord is my refuge and my shield. In him my heart trusts." I prayed, my words a silent whisper in the dark. I didn't pray for God to punish Victoria. I prayed for him to give me the strength to face the truth, whatever it may be, and for the wisdom to honor Robert's memory correctly. Faith was what got our generation through wars and hardships, and in that moment of profound weakness and doubt, I clung to it like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. The next morning, fortified by prayer and a sleepless night of reflection, I called Harrison. "Proceed," I said, and my voice was steady now, clear and resolute. "I don't care what they threaten. I want to know the truth. Robert's honor is worth more than any amount of money." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of respectful frenzy. "I know this is hard, Margaret," he said softly, "but I believe you're doing the right thing, and for what it's worth, I believe in Robert too." That decision liberated me from fear. I would face whatever was coming, not as a grieving widow, but as the guardian of my husband's honor and legacy. A few days after my decision, the world tilted on its axis in a way I could never have predicted. Harrison called me. His voice, usually so calm and measured, was a mixture of excitement and sheer disbelief. "Margaret, you are not going to believe this. I just got a call from the Department of Justice." My heart skipped a beat. The Department of Justice? That sounded terrifying. He explained that the threatening letter from Victoria's lawyer, with its specific but baseless accusations against Robert, had been flagged. It had tripped some kind of federal alert system. They requested an immediate, confidential meeting with Harrison and me. They said it was a matter of national security. I was utterly bewildered. My heart began to race with a strange combination of dread and wonder. What had Robert been involved in? The meeting took place in a sterile, anonymous government office building downtown that had no name on the door. We were led into a conference room with no windows. Two FBI agents, a man and a woman, sat across a long, polished table from us. They were professional, coolly polite, their faces unreadable. They asked me dozens of questions about Robert, his work, his business trips, the changes in his behavior during his last years. I answered honestly, my confusion and anxiety growing with every question. Harrison sat beside me, a silent, watchful presence, his hand resting reassuringly on my case file. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. I felt like a suspect in the story of my own life. After I had finished, after they had exhausted their questions, the male agent leaned forward and looked me directly in the eye. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice serious but not unkind, "your husband, Robert Sullivan, was a patriot." He went on to explain that Robert's international shipping company had been unwittingly and then forcibly used by a sophisticated international crime syndicate to launder money. When Robert discovered what was happening, he was threatened. He could have stayed silent out of a fear for his own life, for my safety, but he didn't. He secretly contacted the FBI. For the last 3 years of his life, my quiet, unassuming husband had been a confidential informant, a key asset in a massive, ongoing federal investigation. They showed us heavily redacted documents, transcripts of recordings Robert had secretly made, encrypted emails he had forwarded to them at great personal risk. They explained that the information Robert provided had led to the dismantling of a major criminal enterprise, saving the pensions and life savings of thousands of ordinary Americans. The late nights I had thought were just work, the sudden business trips I'd resented, the worried, faraway look on his face I had misinterpreted as displeasure, it all clicked into place. It wasn't the weight of guilt he had been carrying. It was the weight of courage and a profound sense of duty to his country. He had been protecting me by keeping me in the dark. I sat there, stunned into absolute silence. A tidal wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, so profound, it felt like a physical weight lifting from my chest. Grief for the secret burden he had carried alone. Regret for my momentary doubt, and a pride so fierce it took my breath away. I wept. I wept for doubting him. I wept for the lonely burden he had shouldered to protect me. And I wept with pride for the quiet, unassuming hero I had married. His legacy wasn't tarnished. It was more brilliant than I could have ever imagined. "Your daughter's attempt at blackmail," the female agent said, her voice sharp and cold as ice, "had it been carried out, would have constituted obstruction of a federal investigation. A very serious felony." Victoria's threat was no longer a weapon. In her blind, greedy rage, she had managed to turn it into a self-inflicted wound. She had unwittingly handed us an unshakable, federally backed legal advantage. As Harrison and I left the anonymous building and stepped back into the bright afternoon sun, I looked up at the sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could take a full, deep breath all the way into the bottom of my lungs. The truth was out, and it was more magnificent than I could have ever dreamed. "We're in an entirely different position now, Margaret," Harrison explained back in his office, his voice brimming with a newfound confidence that mirrored my own. He was practically beaming. "Our case is now not only supported by Robert's will and the evidence of the assault, but it's also shielded by the interests of the federal government." He explained the legal ramifications in terms I could understand, Any attempt by Victoria's side to attack Robert's reputation would now be seen as a direct act of obstruction of justice. They had backed themselves into a corner of their own making, a legal trap from which there was no escape. For the first time, I felt not just hope, but power. The power of the truth. I was no longer a lonely, fragile old woman fighting for her home. I was a witness, a protector of a hero's legacy, and my story had the full weight of the United States law behind it. Unsurprisingly, the communication from Victoria's lawyer came quickly. The tone had shifted dramatically from arrogant threats to panicked pleading. Their settlement offer arrived in an urgent, groveling email. They proposed to return all assets immediately, including the house and its contents, plus a generous seven-figure sum for emotional distress. They had only one condition: that I drop all charges, especially the felony elder abuse complaint, and sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. A few weeks ago, that offer would have been a dream come true, a miracle. Now, it reeked of desperation. It was a blatant attempt at a cover-up. They didn't want to give back what they'd stolen. They wanted to buy my silence to save themselves from prison. I looked across the large mahogany desk at Harrison, whose eyes were waiting for my response. I said a single quiet word: no. He nodded, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. I thought you might say that. My decision was crystal clear. This was no longer about money or property. If I accepted their deal, it would mean that what Victoria did could be erased with a check. The shove, the bruise, the soul-destroying words, "You're useless now," all of it would be buried in a legal document, a secret kept for a price. No, I owed it to Robert. I owed it to the memory of the man he was, and I owed it to myself to see this through. I wanted Victoria to stand before a judge and answer for her actions. That was the only path to real justice. A few days later, Harrison informed me that Victoria and Kevin had been arrested. The charges were extensive: fraud, forgery, and felony elder abuse. When I heard the news, I felt no joy, no sense of victory or vindication. Instead, a profound and weary sadness washed over me. I sat by the window in my small apartment, looking out at the city, and thought of the little girl I had once held in my arms, the child to whom I had taught the first lessons of kindness and empathy, the little girl who cried when she accidentally stepped on a snail. Where did that child go? Something had gone terribly, horribly wrong along the way, a corruption of the soul that I, as her mother, would never fully understand. The arrest wasn't a triumph. It was a family tragedy, a painful admission of a failure I could not comprehend. The story hit the local news. They didn't mention the FBI connection, of course. That remained classified. But the details of the financial fraud and the accusation of a daughter assaulting her elderly mother were sensational enough. My phone began to ring. Old friends, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, even the woman from my old book club, all calling to offer their support, their voices a mixture of shock and comfort. At first I was embarrassed, ashamed to have my family's dirty laundry aired for the world to see. But then I realized I had nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belonged to Victoria alone. The truth was out, and I no longer had to hide my wounds in the dark. I had my voice back. In the days that followed, a strange and unexpected sense of peace settled over me. The crushing burden of secrecy and shame had been lifted. I could walk outside to the grocery store without bowing my head. I could look people in the eye. The legal battle was still ahead, with its depositions and court dates, but the hardest part was over. I had spoken my truth, and the truth, as the Bible says, had set me free. I started to make the small apartment my own, buying a few pots of geraniums for the windowsill. They were small acts, simple things, but they were the signs of a life beginning, slowly but surely, to be rebuilt. Victoria made bail, and then, a few days later, she did the one thing I didn't expect, the one thing that took a breathtaking amount of audacity. She drove to the house that was now, legally, back under my control. The locks changed, the title cleared. I saw her sleek silver Mercedes pull up from the living room window where I was sitting, trying to read a book. A strange, preternatural calm settled over me. The frantic, terrified woman from the motel room was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone quiet and centered and strong. There was no fear, no panic. I had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. I knew it would come. I took a deep breath, placed my book down, and walked to the front door. I chose to meet her on the porch, right there, on the very spot where she had pushed me down. The irony was thick and bitter in the air. The same gray stone steps, the same heavy oak door. But now, our positions were reversed. I was the one standing on the porch looking down, and she was the one on the walkway below, looking up. She looked terrible. Her expensive makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the frantic, hunted look in them. Her designer clothes looked out of place on a person who was so clearly broken and unraveling from the inside out. The contrast between us was stark. My quiet peace and her loud, chaotic desperation. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling, cracking on the single word. "Please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. I was wrong. I wasn't thinking. Tell your lawyer to drop the charges. Please, I can't go to prison. It will ruin my life." She was crying. Great, theatrical sobs. But her tears didn't move me. I watched her and I listened carefully. I could hear the fear in her voice, the panic for her own future, for her social standing, for her comfort. But I couldn't hear a single note of genuine remorse for what she had done to me. She wasn't sorry she had hurt me. She was only sorry she had been caught. I let her finish her rambling, self-pitying plea. When she fell silent, sniffing and waiting for my response, I looked her straight in the eye and asked one simple question. Why? I didn't ask why she took the money. Greed is a monster I can understand, even if I can't condone it. My question was more specific. Why did you push me, Victoria? And why did you say those words? My question hung in the air between us, simple and heavy. She was flustered. She hadn't prepared for that. It wasn't in her script. She stammered something about stress, about pressure, about how I was being difficult. But she had no real answer. Because there is no reason, no justification for that kind of cruelty. And in her sputtering defensive silence, I found my own answer. I realized a devastating and final truth. My daughter wasn't sorry she had hurt me. She was only sorry she was in trouble. In her eyes, I wasn't her mother, a person she had brutalized and betrayed. I was a legal problem to be solved, an obstacle in her path that needed to be managed. The moment that realization dawned, the last lingering embers of affection I held for the person she had become went cold, turning to ash. I wasn't looking at my daughter anymore. I was looking at a stranger who wore her face. "I have nothing more to say to you," I said, and my voice was soft, but as final as a closing door. I turned, walked back inside my house, and closed the heavy oak door between us. The solid click of the bolt sliding into place was a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I leaned my back against the door, the cool wood a comfort against my shoulders, and looked around my beloved living room. This place was once a family. Now, it was just a house. But it was my house, my safe harbor, my place to heal. What does your house mean to you? Is it just walls and a roof? Or does it hold a soul, a collection of memories? Tell me about the place you call home in the comments below. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of reclaiming my home, not just on paper, but in spirit. It wasn't enough to have the keys back. I had to cleanse the space of the violation, of the cold presence Victoria and Kevin had left behind. I hired painters, two cheerful young men who filled the house with the sounds of laughter and radios, and I chose a warm buttery yellow for the living room, replacing the cold, sterile gray Victoria had chosen. The smell of fresh paint was the smell of a new beginning. I rearranged all the furniture, creating sun-drenched reading nooks and opening up the spaces. I filled the empty walls where they had taken down my photos with new ones. Pictures of my travels with Robert, of old friends, of the vibrant, defiant roses blooming in my garden. Every small change was an affirmation. This is my space, governed by my rules and my memories. The house was starting to breathe again, and so was I. In the long, quiet evenings, sitting in Robert's armchair, which I had retrieved from storage, I thought a lot about forgiveness. My generation was taught that forgiveness is a virtue, a sacred, almost automatic duty, especially when it comes to family. But I came to realize that blind forgiveness is not a virtue. It is permission for the abuse to continue. It is an erasure of one's own pain for the comfort of the abuser. Forgiveness, for me now, is not about erasing what happened. I will never forget the feeling of hitting that floor or the sound of my daughter's voice spitting those venomous words. The memory of that bruise will never fade. Forgiveness, I decided, is choosing not to let anger and bitterness take up permanent residence in my soul. It is an act of liberation for myself, not for my transgressor. It is cleaning out my own house. I wrote a letter, not to Victoria, but to her lawyer. In it, I laid out my terms for any possible future. I would not stand in the way of the law. Victoria had to be held accountable for her actions. If, someday, after she had paid her debt to society, she truly wanted to rebuild a relationship with me, there were conditions. She would have to complete a long-term course of psychological therapy. She would have to perform at least 500 hours of community service at an elder care facility to see firsthand the fragility and dignity of the people she held in such contempt. This wasn't punishment. It was, I hoped, a path to redemption. It was the only possible way to build a new beginning, one based on respect and proven change, not just the hollow obligation of blood. And the $10 million she had forfeited, the so-called blood money, I wanted nothing to do with it. Keeping it would feel like holding on to a curse, a constant toxic reminder of greed and cruelty. Money had nearly destroyed my family, and I would not let it define my future or my peace. I told Harrison I had another plan for it, a plan I knew Robert, the quiet patriot, the man of integrity, would have been proud of. We established the Sullivan Foundation. Its purpose was simple and clear: to provide free legal aid to elderly victims of financial and physical abuse. My pain had given me a purpose. My story, once a source of deep shame, would become a light for others who were lost in the darkness of fear and silence. The legacy of Robert and Margaret Sullivan would not be a number in a bank account or a grand house filled with things. It would be lives protected, voices heard, and dignity restored. Through all of this, through the pain and the fear and the eventual triumph, I learned the most important lesson. My worth was never in the $25 million. It was not in this big, beautiful house. It wasn't even in my role as a wife or a mother, as cherished as those roles were. My worth is in my resilience, in my compassion, in my ability to get back up after being knocked down. Victoria had called me useless, but I know now that I have never been more useful or more powerful in my entire life. The morning air is sweet today. I've spent the whole morning in the garden, my hands deep in the cool, damp earth, a feeling of connection to something real and alive. I'm planting new roses, the David Austin variety, with the impossibly fluffy petals and the scent of old-world perfume that I've always adored. The scent of rich soil, of fragrant blossoms, and of clean, fresh air fills my lungs. As I firm the earth around the roots of a young plant, it feels like I'm nurturing more than just a flower. I am nurturing new life, new hope, right here in my own backyard. This garden is where I feel closest to Robert, surrounded by the beauty he helped create. And it's also where I feel closest to myself, strong and rooted and capable of growth. The mail carrier brought a letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It's from Victoria. She's in a court-mandated treatment facility now, part of her plea agreement. I open it and read. The words are clumsy, full of therapeutic jargon she's just learned about accountability and making amends. She talks of remorse and recognizing her patterns. I don't know if the change is real or if it will last. But as I stand there in the sun, I realize something profound. It no longer matters to my own peace of mind. I fold the letter and put it away in an old box with other things from the past. That is her story to live now, not mine. My life no longer revolves around waiting for an apology or a sign of redemption from her. The phone rings inside, and I go in to answer it, wiping the dirt from my hands. It's Harrison, his voice buoyant and cheerful. Margaret, I have wonderful news. The Sullivan Foundation just helped an 80-year-old man in Ohio win his house back. His grandson had tricked him into signing it over. A story much like yours. The man was in tears. He said you gave him the courage to fight. A pure, warm joy spreads through me. A feeling so clean and bright it feels like the sunshine on the inside. This is it. This is the meaning. My scar has become someone else's healing. Our legacy is alive, and it is good. This afternoon, I sat at my computer, a cup of tea by my side, looking at pictures of majestic glaciers and deep blue fjords. I'm booking a cruise to Alaska, the trip Robert and I always dreamed of. I will go alone, and the thought doesn't fill me with sadness, but with a quiet thrill. I will go not as a memorial to him, but as a celebration of life, a celebration of the woman who found her way back to herself. I will stand on the deck of that ship, breathe in the cold, clean northern air, and know that I am completely and utterly free. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, I unconsciously touch the spot on my arm where the bruise used to be. The physical mark is long gone, faded back into healthy skin, but I can still feel its ghost, not as a pain, but as a reminder. It reminds me of the fragility of trust and the cruelty of greed. But most of all, it reminds me of the strength that lies hidden inside a woman who everyone, including herself, thought had lost everything. That scar is not a mark of shame. It is my medal of survival. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink. I'm sitting on the porch swing, the one Robert built for me with his own two hands, moving gently back and forth. A glass of iced tea sweats on the small table beside me. The wind chimes he hung from the eaves are singing their soft, metallic song. I am not a grieving widow. I am not a victim. I am a gardener, a philanthropist, a friend, a world traveler in the making. Finding my own voice again has taught me how precious every story is, especially those that have been kept silent for too long. I know that when we sit down together, the stories can just flow like a river. Today, I've shared a piece of my heart, and now I would be so honored to hear a piece of yours. You know, sometimes it's just a little click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share, and to many people, it might just be a small passing gesture. But to me, and to all the quiet voices waiting to be heard, every single one of those clicks is a small light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. That simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it's the fuel that keeps me sharing these stories. After my story was told, something shifted in me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to hear me. And now that you've listened, I realize that what I want most is to listen to you. Down below in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt you weren't being heard. Tell me about a passion you have that others might have thought was silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the smallest, most quiet way. I will read them, and I will carry them with me, because your story matters. We want to build Sapphire Revenge into a community where we can share the stories from the bottom of our hearts. I know you have your own private stories that can sometimes be difficult to share with the family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. If you don't have sad stories like the one I've been through, then please share your happy ones. Like a small joy you experienced today, please share it with me. It will be a tremendous source of motivation, helping me and all the other viewers watching this to heal and to find faith and strength in our own lives. If you're watching this on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I so hope to share this journey with you. Let's build a community together where we can share our feelings with true sincerity. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you once again for sitting with me today. It truly means the world.